5 years ago, Jonathan Reed walked away from everything, a career anyone would have fought to keep, and a woman who had never once waited for anything in her life. Evelyn Carter didn't chase him. She didn't explain herself. She simply kept a promise no one knew she'd made quietly, every year, in a file only she could find. 5 years later, he came back, not alone. A little girl took his hand, looked directly at Evelyn and asked, "Are you the one who made my daddy leave?" The room went still. What do you do when the person you waited for returns but no longer belongs to you? It was Abigail Stone, the company's senior operations coordinator, who happened to be crossing the lobby at that exact moment and saw it all. She saw Jonathan Reed standing near the entrance, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding the small hand of a girl who could not have been older than 6, whose backpack was shaped like a bear, and whose eyes were scanning the lobby with the wide, unhurried attention of a child cataloging a new world. She saw Evelyn Carter step off the elevator and stop. She saw the little girl look up before Jonathan did, and she heard the question, clear across the marble floor, delivered without malice and without any awareness that it was the kind of question that could stop a room. Abigail had known Jonathan Reed. She had known Evelyn Carter for 11 years. She understood, in the particular way of a person who has worked closely with powerful people for a long time, that whatever was about to happen in this building had been approaching for 5 years and had finally arrived. She stayed where she was and did not say a word. Jonathan turned when he heard his name, which Evelyn had not spoken aloud, but which was somehow in the air between them anyway. For one unguarded moment, something moved across his face. Then it was still again. "That's Miss Carter, Mia," he said, quietly. And then, to Evelyn, with the same direct steadiness he had always carried, "You have a problem I think I can fix. Come upstairs," she said. Jonathan Reed had arrived at Callaway Systems on a Wednesday in early autumn, referred for a systems engineering role that 3 other candidates had declined on the grounds that the scope was unclear and the timeline unrealistic. Jonathan had read the technical brief, asked one clarifying question, and said he would take it. He was not loud. He was not the kind of person who filled a room with his presence or competed for attention in meetings. He was the kind of person who fixed things quietly, methodically, in a way that other people only noticed when the things stopped breaking. Evelyn noticed him the way she noticed all her engineers, through output, through the reports that crossed her desk, through the problems that stopped appearing. What she had not anticipated was the morning he knocked on her office door at 7:45 before her assistant arrived, before the day had officially begun, and told her without preamble that the Meridian project had a foundational flaw that no one else had caught. If they did not address it before third-quarter integration, the whole system would fail under load. She stared at him for a long moment. He did not fill the silence. He simply stood there with the evidence in his hands and the patience of a person who understood that a good argument does not need to be repeated. "Show me," she said. He had. 3 hours later, she authorized a full diagnostic review. It cost 2 weeks and a difficult board conversation. It saved the company from something considerably more expensive. After that, she paid a different kind of attention. She began to consult him outside formal channels. He began to speak to her the way he spoke to no one else at Callaway directly, without the social buffering everyone applied when addressing the CEO. He told her when she was wrong. She told him when his instincts outpaced his evidence. It was the most honest professional relationship she had ever had, and it became something else, slowly, the way things do when 2 people are paying close attention to everything except what they are feeling. There were late evenings in the server room. There were conversations that started with infrastructure and ended somewhere neither of them could map. There was a night during the Meridian launch when the system held exactly as Jonathan had said it would, and Evelyn looked at him across the server room with something she had not felt in a very long time, uncomplicated, unguarded gratitude. And he looked back with something that was not entirely professional. Neither of them said anything about it. Neither of them had to. Then came the Halcyon project, and everything broke. The Halcyon data integration had been Jonathan's design, an ambitious live system overhaul, consolidating 3 legacy platforms into one. 3 weeks before launch, synchronization errors began appearing. Jonathan flagged it and requested a delay. The board refused. There were contracts, quarterly expectations, and men in that room who had been looking for a reason to question Evelyn's judgment. Evelyn let the launch proceed. The system failed at 4:47 in the morning, 11 days later. No client data was lost, but visibility was its own catastrophe in the financial technology sector. The board convened within 48 hours. They wanted accountability with a face. Evelyn gave them Jonathan's. She told herself it was because his name was on the design documents. She told herself one person's career was a recoverable loss, that the institution mattered more than any single node within it, that this was the kind of decision that leadership demanded, and that soft people could not make. She assembled these justifications in order, like a structure she intended to inhabit. Jonathan was called in on a Thursday. The conversation was brief. When it was over, he stood, straightened his jacket, and said 4 words. "I understand your position." He did not defend himself. He picked up his bag and walked out. She watched him from the window. He did not look up. The official story of the years that followed was clean. Callaway recovered, restructured, and grew. Evelyn made several bold acquisitions, expanded the firm's managed infrastructure division into a national presence, and doubled revenue. Industry publications described her as one of the most effective technology executives of her generation, and they were not wrong. The unofficial version was quieter. Evelyn had never filled Jonathan's position. She told her HR director the work no longer required a single point of ownership, a reasonable justification that was also not true. Every candidate who came in reminded her, in some specific and inarticulate way, of what she had traded. One had his methodical silence. Another had his habit of identifying the structural problem beneath the stated problem. She did not rehire for the position. She kept his personnel file. She told herself it was documentation that she might need it if questions arose about the Halcyon incident. Every year when files were audited, she moved his folder to a different subdirectory rather than archiving it. By the 4th year, it was buried 4 levels deep in a structure only she could navigate, and she accessed it once each autumn, always on a Tuesday, always without quite acknowledging why. She was not waiting for him. She was certain of this. She did not permit herself the indulgence of waiting for things that were gone. She was simply being thorough. That was all. Thoroughness was a professional virtue she had long since made a way of life, and the maintenance of complete records was an extension of that rigor, not a symptom of something she was unwilling to name. She told herself this so many times that the telling itself eventually became the evidence, though she was careful not to examine it too closely. In the 5th year, she had begun a new habit, arriving at the office earlier than usual, before the building filled with the particular quality of noise that came with a full workday, and sitting at her desk in the first light with coffee and whatever she could not quite bring herself to think about in the presence of other people. It was not insomnia. It was not grief. It was the quiet, specific texture of a question that had no answer and could not be put down. She simply kept the file. The system failure that brought Jonathan Reed back had begun, as most serious failures do, not with a dramatic event, but with a quiet anomaly that nobody took seriously until it was too late. A routing error in the company's core infrastructure had been flagged 3 weeks earlier by a junior analyst. The report had gone to Henry Lawson, the head of systems architecture, who had reviewed it, determined it was within acceptable parameters, and filed it without escalation. Henry had been at Callaway for 11 years and had a particular talent for organizational politics and a somewhat less developed talent for technical diagnosis. By the morning, Jonathan walked back into the lobby. The routing error had cascaded into a full platform failure, affecting 11 enterprise clients. 2 had made phone calls. 1 had sent a legal letter. The crisis briefing Evelyn had been running when her assistant interrupted her had been going for 2 hours and had produced no solution. because the people in the room understood the business implications, but not the technical architecture. Jonathan had known about the failure before he came. A former colleague had sent a message 4 days earlier, asking with careful professional neutrality whether Jonathan happened to be available and whether he still understood the legacy routing stack the way he once had. Jonathan had read the message 3 times. He had thought about it for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, he had asked Mia whether she wanted to see where he used to work. "Is it big?" she asked. "Pretty big," he said. "Okay," she said and finished her cereal. Upstairs, in the conference room adjoining Evelyn's office, Jonathan explained the failure in 11 minutes. He traced the architecture on the whiteboard from memory routing tables, cascade points, the specific interaction between the legacy stack and a newer integration layer installed 18 months ago without fully mapping dependencies. He identified 4 failure nodes and ranked them by urgency. Nobody interrupted him. Henry Lawson at the far end of the table did not speak. "How long to fix it?" Evelyn asked. 2 critical nodes, stable by midnight. Full resolution within 48 hours. Henry spoke then measured, territorial. He noted that an outside consultant was not necessary and that the architecture Jonathan had described was based on documentation, 5 years out of date. He said it in the tone of a man who understood that what was being proposed was a judgment on his team's capabilities. Evelyn looked at Henry. She looked at Jonathan. She looked at Mia, who was drawing in a small notebook from the bare backpack, apparently indifferent to all of it. "Give him access to the server environment," Evelyn said. What the conference room had witnessed spread through the building within the hour. Rumors about Mia were immediate and entirely wrong. People who remembered Jonathan from before processed the sight of him with a child as evidence of the 5 years between he had left, built a different life, and returned with visible proof of it. Nobody asked directly. Nobody at Callaway asked Evelyn Carter direct questions about anything personal. Evelyn did not go home. She sat in her office past 7, reviewing client communications, reading without absorbing, aware that 4 floors below her, Jonathan Reed was doing work that her own team had failed to do. She had told herself she would give him the access he needed and let him work. That was what she was doing. At 8:43, her door opened without a knock. Mia stood in the doorway in socks. She had removed her shoes at some point, holding her backpack by one ear. "Daddy said I could come up," she said. "He said you wouldn't mind." Evelyn set down the document in her hand. "Did he? He said you were probably still working." Mia looked around the office with the absorbed attention she had given the skyline. "It's very clean in here." "Thank you," Evelyn said after a moment. Mia crossed the room and climbed into the chair across the desk, the chair that board members used, that senior partners occupied when Evelyn had something difficult to say to them, and settled herself with the complete unself-consciousness of someone who has not been taught that certain chairs carry weight. "Are you the one who was mean to my dad?" she asked. The room was quiet. Evelyn thought, with the careful precision she applied to everything, about how to answer. Then she said, "I made a decision that hurt him. I'm not sure that's the same thing." Mia considered this. "He said people do bad things sometimes because they're scared, not mean." A pause. "But I'm still not sure." Evelyn Carter, who had faced down activist investors and walked out of negotiations that other executives found terrifying, found she had nothing to say to this. She nodded once, slowly, as though filing the information. They sat together for another 20 minutes, Mia drawing in her notebook, Evelyn reading documents she still could not absorb, until Jonathan appeared in the doorway, jacket off, looking the way he always had when he had been working, focused down to the bone, slightly elsewhere, a man whose mind was still running a calculation even when his body had stopped. He looked at Mia. He looked at Evelyn. Something in his face became very still. "She let herself in," Evelyn said, before he could speak. "She does that," he said. Mia gathered her backpack. "I like her office," she announced to no one in particular. Jonathan's expression, briefly and without permission, became something close to a smile. By the following morning, the 2 critical failure nodes were stable. Jonathan's diagnostic had been correct in every particular. The affected clients were notified, and the legal letter was met with a remediation timeline that satisfied the relevant parties. Henry Lawson called a team meeting without including Jonathan, presented a recovery framework that borrowed substantially from the approach Jonathan had sketched on the whiteboard, and took the questions from his team with the confidence of a man who had decided that proximity to a correct solution was close enough to having arrived at it. Jonathan said nothing about this. He continued working through the secondary failure nodes, and the two junior engineers who found excuses to stop by his open door ended up staying to discuss architecture for considerably longer than their pretexts required. There was no ceremony to what Jonathan did. No announcement, no request for acknowledgement, no visible register of the gap between the credit being claimed one floor above and the work being done in this room. He moved through the problem the way he had always moved through problems, methodically, without drama, with the quiet sufficiency of someone who understands that the work is either done or it isn't, and that the audience for that fact is the system itself. One of the junior engineers, watching him trace a dependency chain on a notepad, said later that it was the most focused she had ever seen another person, and that she had not known until that afternoon that focus could look like a form of kindness. Mia had been left that morning with Abigail Stone, who had volunteered without being asked. By midday, Abigail was watching Mia eat crackers from the break room vending machine, when Mia said, very casually, "My mom died when I was a baby. Daddy knew her from before. He said he couldn't leave me." Abigail set down her coffee. "He was her friend?" she said carefully. "Her best friend. He said she didn't have anyone else, so he stayed." Mia examined a cracker. "He said that's what you do." Abigail thought about this for a long time after Mia moved on to something else. She thought about it while she cross-referenced the Halcyon project documentation that afternoon, something she had been doing quietly, on her own time, since the moment she had seen Jonathan in the lobby and remembered things she had not thought about in years. She thought about the original testing logs. She thought about the version submitted to the board versus the version in the preliminary reports. She thought about Charles Whitaker, who had been on the board 5 years ago and had left under circumstances the company described as amicable, and that everyone with institutional memory understood as something considerably more complicated. Abigail Stone was meticulous. She was not the kind of person who made accusations without documentation. She was also not the kind of person who sat on documentation once she had it. She printed the access logs, the timestamp comparison, and the deactivated contractor ID. She cross-referenced the dates against the board calendar. She put everything in a folder, labeled it with the project name and the current date, and sat with it for 1 hour before she acted. That evening, she requested a private meeting with Evelyn Carter. What Abigail laid out was not dramatic. It was a sequence of administrative facts, each individually explainable, arranged in an order that made the explanation untenable. The Halcyon testing log submitted to the board showed synchronization errors beginning 48 hours post-launch. The preliminary internal logs archived in a backup system that had survived 3 infrastructure overhauls, because nobody had specifically deleted it, showed those same errors appearing not 48 hours in, but 4 hours before launch. Someone had altered the timestamps. The access logs for that alteration pointed through 2 intermediary accounts to a user ID belonging to a contractor under Charles Whitaker's office. Whitaker had held a board position directly threatened by Halcyon's success. Success would have consolidated infrastructure oversight under the systems engineering division and removed a significant portion of his budget. Authority. He had motive. He had access. He had been present when Jonathan's name was offered, and he had not objected. Evelyn sat with this for a long time after Abigail left. She sat with the specific weight of understanding that the decision she had made, the one she had told herself for 5 years, was a hard but rational trade. The kind of calculation that leadership required had not been a hard decision at all. It had been a manipulated one. She had been handed a story and accepted it because she needed one, and had spent 5 years building her self-justification on a foundation someone else had constructed for her. She had given Jonathan's name to a room full of men in the service of a lie she had not known was a lie. That distinction felt, in this moment, entirely insufficient. She went to find him. Jonathan was still in the fourth-floor workspace. It was past 9. He looked up when she entered without the surprise of a man who had not been expecting her more, like a man who had been waiting for this conversation and was simply noting its arrival. "Why did you come back?" she asked. Not the technical crisis. He knew that. "Someone asked for help," he said. "I'm not in the habit of declining. That's not what I'm asking." A pause. "What are you asking?" She looked at him directly. "Why you didn't contest what happened. Why you just left." Jonathan considered the question with the same care he gave to technical problems, not as evasion, but as genuine commitment to accuracy. "Because the truth didn't matter there," he said. "Not in that room. Not at that moment. You needed a name for the board. The truth was beside the point. I wasn't interested in fighting for a version of events the institution had already decided not to hear. It was manipulated. The words were harder to say than she had expected. The logs. Someone altered the evidence before it reached the board. I have the documentation." Something in Jonathan's expression changed, not with shock, but with the quality of a person receiving confirmation of something suspected for a long time. "Whitaker," he said. "Not a question. You knew?" "I suspected. I didn't have access to the evidence." A pause. "I assumed you did." The sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Not accusation, just the simple, clear articulation of 5 years of wondering whether she had known and acted anyway. "I didn't," she said. "I need you to believe that." Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. "I do," he said. "That isn't absolution," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They sat with that, both understanding there is no version of this conversation where the weight lifts entirely. The fact of what was done is not erased by the revelation that it was done under false premises. Some things are paid forward, not backward. Jonathan did not ask her to feel better about what had happened, and Evelyn did not pretend that the documentation changed the essential transaction, only clarified it. What she had done had come from fear and pressure and the particular moral cowardice of a person who could see every angle of a situation and still chose the one that cost someone else instead of herself. She had known, even then, that she was choosing it. That was the part she had been living with. "What are you going to do with the documentation?" he asked. "The right thing," she said. Finally, Evelyn called a full company meeting for the following Thursday. She stood at the front without notes. She had never used notes for the things that mattered most, because notes implied a distance from the material she was not willing to claim. She told them what had happened. The Halcyon failure, the manipulated logs, the contractor under Whitaker's authority. She told them about Charles Whitaker's motive and his access and the 26 months between the incident and his departure, during which nothing had been investigated and nothing had been said. She did not soften the part about her own role that she had accepted an incomplete picture because the picture had been convenient, that she had treated a manufactured version of events as sufficient basis for a consequential decision, and that the person who had paid for that decision had deserved better. Henry Lawson, in the third row, looked at the floor. Abigail Stone, in the back, kept her eyes on Evelyn. Jonathan was not there. By choice, he was in the fourth-floor workspace, finishing the last of the secondary nodes. Evelyn told the room about his work over the preceding days. She told them what the cascade would have cost if it had not been contained. She told them that the stable, functioning infrastructure, underpinning every client relationship they had, was the work of the same person who had quietly fixed what her own team had been unable to address. "The person who should be standing here," she said, "has never been me." Afterward, alone in her office with the building emptied out around her, she drafted a formal letter of offer, co-founder designation, full equity recalibration. She included the documentation as an attachment, not because the offer required it, but because he deserved to see the record in its entirety. She signed it and told her assistant to deliver it that evening. Jonathan read the letter in the fourth-floor workspace with Mia asleep on the small couch Abigail had arranged, without explanation, understanding, in her meticulous way, that certain practical needs should simply be met. He read it twice, set it down, and looked at Mia, who slept with the thoroughness of a child who treats rest as seriously as any other activity, her bare backpack tucked under one arm. He did not answer that night. The next morning he found Evelyn in her office before her assistant arrived. She was at her desk with coffee that was still too hot to drink, looking out at the city in the early light. She heard him come in but did not turn around immediately. "No," he said. She turned then. "I appreciate the offer," he said. "I understand what it means and what it cost you to make it. But I'm not interested in taking a position offered as restitution. That's not the same as taking a position because it's the right fit. I'm not sure those things can exist in the same space." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. Then she said something that was not on any list she had prepared. Something that bypassed every professional framework she had built over 20 years. "Don't go," she said. Not as a negotiation. Not as a business argument. Just those two words, plainly, with the exhausted honesty of someone who has run out of the energy required to dress a true thing in strategy. Jonathan looked at her. "Evelyn, I know what I'm asking," she said. "I know it isn't the same as the offer. I know it isn't something you owe me." She set down the coffee cup. "I'm asking anyway." Small footsteps in the hallway. Mia appeared in the doorway in her socks again, backpack trailing by one ear. She looked between the two adults with the complete accuracy of a child's perception, the kind that cuts straight through whatever adults are performing to whatever they are actually feeling. "Are you fighting?" she asked. "No," Jonathan said. "Are you making up?" A pause. "Working on it," Evelyn said. Mia considered this with appropriate seriousness. Then she crossed the room, climbed into the chair across the desk, her chair now, by the sovereign authority of repeated use, and opened her notebook. "Okay," she said, as though that settled it. Jonathan looked at his daughter. He looked at Evelyn, who was watching Mia with an expression that had not appeared on her face in the company of any adult in longer than she could accurately remember. Unguarded, unperforming, something very close to warmth. He did not say yes that morning. What followed was slow and careful, made up of small things that accumulated rather than arrived. Jonathan stayed in the city. He took a consulting arrangement with Callaway, not the co-founder role, not yet, but a structured engagement that gave him access to the systems he had helped stabilize. He worked from the fourth-floor space when he needed to be on site. Mia attended the school 3 blocks from the building and occasionally appeared at Abigail's desk after pickup, still in her backpack, to deliver reports on the day's events, with the same systematic attention she applied to everything. Evelyn began holding fewer crisis briefings and more structured technical reviews, the kind where the people who actually understood the systems were in the room. She began asking Henry Lawson direct questions about his team's capacity, rather than accepting summary reports. She began leaving the building before 8 most evenings. She and Jonathan had coffee some mornings before the day began. They had dinner twice, once with Mia, who ordered a cheese pizza, and then systematically removed the cheese, which she did not like, but had ordered because she wanted to understand the mechanism by which it was added. Once without her, which they both treated with the careful casualness of people who are not entirely sure they are on a date and are not ready to settle the question. Mia had opinions about all of it, delivered at intervals and without invitation. She thought Evelyn's office was excellent. She thought Evelyn should smile more, a piece of feedback delivered directly, with the clear expectation it would be acted upon. She told Abigail that her father was being careful the way he does when he doesn't want to break something, a formulation so precise that both adults, hearing it separately, were quiet for some time afterward. Evelyn started learning the name of the plant in her lobby. It was a fiddle leaf fig. It had been there for 3 years and she had never asked. She asked the building manager about the watering schedule. She asked her assistant whether there were others throughout the office that she might have walked past every day without registering. There were 7. She knew none of their names. She began to know them. It was a small thing. It was, she understood, the kind of small thing that meant something different from what it appeared to mean on the surface, A woman who had spent 20 years measuring everything by its strategic value, quietly beginning to pay attention to things that had no strategic value at all. She did not announce this shift. She was not sure she could have explained it. She only knew that it was happening,